Montana Territory, 1882. Winter's icy grip held the rugged landscape hostage, transforming the majestic Bitterroot Mountains into a treacherous death trap for the unprepared. Vaughn Jennings pulled his sheepskin collar higher against the howling wind, squinting through the blinding wall of white that threatened to erase the world around him. At 25, he'd already learned the harsh lesson every cowboy eventually understood. The frontier was no place for tender emotions. Love was a luxury men like him couldn't afford, not when survival demanded every ounce of strength and focus. "Come on, Thunder," he urged his sturdy black gelding forward. "Let's get back before we both freeze solid." The unexpected blizzard had caught him miles from the Triple J ranch where he worked as foreman. 2 years in the position had earned him respect among the hands, but little warmth filled his sparse cabin at night, just the way he preferred it. Attachments meant vulnerability, and vulnerability got men killed in this unforgiving country. Thunder's ears suddenly pricked forward, his head turning sharply eastward despite the stinging snow. Vaughn tensed, one hand moving instinctively to the Colt revolver at his hip. In these mountains, unexpected encounters rarely meant good news. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, following the horse's gaze. That's when he saw it, a dark smudge against the endless white, barely visible through the swirling snow. Probably just a fallen tree or rock formation playing tricks on his snow-blind eyes. But Thunder pawed the ground insistently. Vaughn hesitated. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the ranch lay a good hour's ride southwest. The smart choice was clear: continue home and leave whatever mysteries the blizzard held to themselves. Yet something, instinct, perhaps, or the restlessness that had plagued him since childhood, pulled him toward the anomaly. "Damn it all," he muttered, steering Thunder off their path. Just a quick look. As they approached, the dark shape resolved into the unmistakable silhouette of an overturned wagon, half buried in snowdrifts. No sign of horses. They'd either broken free or been taken. Either way, it meant trouble. "Hello," he called, his voice swallowed by the howling wind. "Anyone alive?" Silence answered him. He dismounted, sinking knee-deep in snow, and approached the wagon cautiously. Years of frontier life had taught him the value of vigilance. This could be a trap, an ambush set by road agents who preyed on good Samaritans. The wagon lay on its side, one wheel spinning lazily in the wind. Supplies were scattered across the snow: canned goods, fabric, books. Not the typical possessions of travelers passing through. Someone had been moving with purpose. A soft sound caught his attention, so faint he nearly missed it beneath the wind's mournful howl. A whimper, distinctly human, coming from beneath the canvas covering. Vaughn drew his revolver and approached cautiously, using his free hand to pull back the frozen material. What he found stole the breath from his lungs more effectively than the bitter cold. A young woman lay huddled against wooden crates, her face ashen with cold except for 2 bright spots of color high on her cheeks. Her eyes fluttered open at his movement, startling blue, like summer skies he'd nearly forgotten existed in this endless winter. Long blonde hair spilled around her shoulders, partially covered by a woolen shawl that provided pitifully inadequate protection against Montana's merciless elements. "Please," she whispered through cracked lips. "Help me." Vaughn holstered his gun immediately. "Miss, what happened? Where are your traveling companions?" "No companions," she managed, her voice threadbare. "Driver, hired in Missoula. He took the horses when the storm hit. Said he'd return with help." Her eyes drifted closed. "That was yesterday." Vaughn cursed under his breath. The driver had abandoned her, almost certainly intending never to return. Such treachery wasn't uncommon in these parts, where desperation sometimes overwhelmed decency. Miss, stay awake." He touched her cheek gently and found it dangerously cold. "What's your name?" "Felicity," she murmured. "Felicity Vaughan. I'm Vaughn Jennings. I'm going to get you somewhere warm, but you need to stay conscious." "Understand." She nodded weakly. Hypothermia had clearly set in, and Vaughn knew the nearest town was too far to reach in this blizzard. His only choice was to take her back to the Triple J. He gathered what provisions he could salvage, then carefully lifted Felicity from the wagon. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, but even that slight burden would slow their progress through the deepening snow. After securing her to Thunder's saddle, he mounted behind her, wrapping his coat around them both. "Hold on," he instructed, pulling her firmly against his chest for warmth. It's not far. A lie, but a necessary one. In truth, the journey back would be perilous, but telling her so would only waste energy she couldn't spare. As they rode, Vaughn found himself unusually aware of the woman in his arms. Something about her vulnerability awakened protective instincts he'd long suppressed. Dangerous feelings in a dangerous land. He reminded himself this was simple human decency, nothing more. Once she was safe and recovered, she'd continue to whatever destination had brought her to this wilderness, and he would return to the solitude that kept him alive. The blizzard intensified as they rode, transforming the familiar landscape into an alien white wasteland. Thunder plodded forward resolutely, but Vaughn could feel the horse's strength flagging. When Felicity's head lolled against his chest, panic surged through him. "Miss Vaughn?" "Felicity." He jostled her gently. "Talk to me." "So cold," she whispered. "I know. Tell me why you came to Montana." "Focus on speaking." "Teaching position," she replied after a long moment. "In Silver Creek." "You're a schoolteacher?" Vaughn couldn't hide his surprise. Silver Creek was a rough mining settlement 40 miles east, hardly a place for a refined young woman. They need education. Children deserve better chances. Her idealism struck him as simultaneously admirable and foolish. The frontier chewed up idealists and spat out their bones. Yet something in her determination resonated with a part of himself he'd long buried, the boy who'd once believed in possibilities beyond mere survival. "How old are you?" he asked, desperate to keep her talking. 22. Just finished normal school in Boston. Boston. That explained the quality of her clothing and the refined accent he'd detected beneath her weakness. A city woman with no conception of what awaited her. Another victim the West would claim, unless. "There's the ranch," he said with relief as the shadowy outlines of buildings emerged through the white haze. The main house stood dark. The ranch owner and his family had departed for Denver before winter set in, leaving Vaughn in charge until spring. Only the bunkhouse and his foreman's cabin showed signs of life, smoke curling from chimneys despite the storm. He headed directly for his cabin, knowing the bunkhouse full of ranch hands was no place for an unmarried woman, especially one in such a vulnerable state. As he dismounted with Felicity in his arms, the cabin door flew open. "Good God, Vaughn!" exclaimed Milo Peters, the oldest of the ranch hands. "We thought you were done for in this blow." "Who's that?" "Found her abandoned in an overturned wagon," Vaughn explained tersely, carrying Felicity inside. "She needs warmth, fast. Get Doc Harper if you can reach him." "In this storm?" "Not likely," Milo replied, but hurried off toward the bunkhouse nonetheless. Vaughn laid Felicity gently on his bed, quickly stoking the fire and adding logs until the flames roared. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint, and her shivers had subsided, a dangerous sign indicating her body was giving up the fight against the cold. Working quickly, he removed her snow-soaked outer garments, leaving her in a simple cotton chemise and petticoat. Propriety demanded restraint, but survival required immediate action. He wrapped her in every blanket he possessed, then, after a moment's hesitation, removed his own outer clothing and slid under the covers beside her, pulling her against his chest. "What are you doing?" she mumbled, briefly stirring. "Saving your life," he replied simply. "Body heat is the fastest way to warm you. I apologize for the impropriety, but I've no intention of explaining to the Almighty why I let you freeze to death out of excessive modesty." Whether from exhaustion or understanding, she didn't protest further. Gradually, her shivering resumed, a good sign that her body was fighting back. Vaughn held her carefully, acutely aware of the line he walked between necessary medical care and inappropriate intimacy. "Why?" she whispered after a long silence. "Why save me?" The question caught him off guard. What kind of man would leave someone to die in a blizzard? "The kind who abandoned me with the wagon." Her voice strengthened slightly. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You're still a city woman in dangerous country. And you're a kind man pretending to be hard," she countered, surprising him with her perception despite her weakened state. "Your eyes give you away." Vaughn fell silent, unsettled by her words. Few people saw past the careful barriers he'd constructed, and none had named what they saw with such certainty. Especially not a half-frozen schoolteacher who'd known him less than 2 hours. "Rest," he finally said. "We'll talk when you're stronger." She complied, drifting into sleep against his chest. Vaughn remained awake, listening to the blizzard's assault against his cabin walls and wondering what twist of fate had brought this woman into his carefully ordered existence. 3 days passed before the storm finally broke. 3 days of Vaughn sleeping on the floor beside the fireplace, while Felicity occupied his bed, slowly regaining her strength. 3 days of uncomfortable awareness that his solitary refuge had been invaded by a presence he couldn't ignore. "You can't possibly be serious about continuing to Silver Creek," he said on the morning of the 4th day, watching her attempt to arrange her hair into some semblance of order. She'd borrowed one of his shirts, the sleeves rolled up multiple times to accommodate her slender arms. The sight created an unexpected tightness in his chest. "I signed a contract," she replied simply, securing the last pin. "They're expecting their teacher by month's end. They're expecting an unmarried woman to travel alone through 40 miles of mountain wilderness in winter. I wasn't alone when I started. That arrangement simply changed unexpectedly." Vaughn snorted. "That change nearly cost your life. Silver Creek can wait until spring. And what shall I do until then? Impose on your hospitality for months?" She turned to face him fully, those remarkable blue eyes challenging. "I appreciate your rescue, Mr. Jennings, but I have responsibilities." "You have a death wish, Miss Vaughn," he countered, frustration mounting. Why couldn't she see the foolishness of her plan? The path to Silver Creek won't be clear for weeks, possibly months. Even then, it's no place for a woman alone. I'm not some delicate flower that will wilt at the first sign of difficulty. No, you're a stubborn Easterner with no concept of frontier realities. Their eyes locked in silent combat, neither willing to concede. Finally, Vaughn sighed and ran a hand through his dark hair. "At least stay until you've fully recovered," he offered, softening his tone. "I'll have one of the men ride to Silver Creek when possible, inform them of the delay." Felicity hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "I suppose that's reasonable. Thank you." The door opened before Vaughn could respond, admitting Milo with an armful of firewood and a knowing grin that made Vaughn want to punch him. "Mornin', Miss Vaughn," the older man greeted cheerfully. "Brought more wood. Cold snap's coming tonight, according to my trick knee." "Thank you, Mr. Peters," Felicity smiled warmly. "Your kindness is appreciated. Think nothing of it. We're almighty pleased to have some feminine refinement around here." Milo's eyes twinkled as he glanced between them. "Been telling the boys it's about time Vaughn found himself some." "That'll be all, Milo," Vaughn cut in sharply. "Don't you have horses to tend?" After the older man departed with a chuckle, an awkward silence fell. Felicity busied herself straightening the already neat bed, her cheeks flushed. "You needn't worry about impropriety," Vaughn finally said. "The men understand the circumstances." "Do they?" she asked quietly. Mr. Peters seems to have drawn different conclusions. Milo's an old romantic fool who sees wedding bells every time a man and woman share the same air. Vaughn moved toward the door, suddenly needing escape. "I have work to do. Rest. There are books on the shelf if you get bored." Outside, the brilliant sunshine reflecting off pristine snow nearly blinded him after days of storm darkness. The ranch was stirring to life, men clearing paths between buildings and assessing damage. Normalcy, or what passed for it in winter's grip. "Boss," called Ethan Miller, the youngest ranch hand. "Found something you might want to see." Vaughn followed him to the barn, where a leather trunk sat prominently in the center aisle. "Found it half buried in snow near the south pasture," Ethan explained. "Figure it might have come from that lady's wagon. Has Effie stamped on top. Felicity's belongings." Vaughn ran his hand over the ornate initials. "Good work. I'll take it to her." When he returned to the cabin with the trunk, Felicity's eyes widened in disbelief. "My things. I thought everything was lost." "Seems the wind had other ideas," Vaughn replied, setting it down. "What's so important inside that you look ready to cry?" She knelt beside the trunk, fingers tracing the brass latches. "Letters from my parents. Teaching materials. My mother's locket." Her voice softened. "All I have left of home." Something in her tone caught his attention. "Left of home." Felicity opened the trunk carefully, revealing neatly packed books, clothing, and small personal items. "My parents died last year. Influenza. Our Boston home went to creditors. Teaching was my chance to start fresh." The simple statement illuminated her determination in new light. Not mere stubbornness, but desperation born of necessity. Vaughn understood survival's imperatives better than most. "I'm sorry," he offered inadequately. She smiled, the expression transforming her face despite the sadness in her eyes. "Thank you. For this, and everything else." An uncomfortable warmth spread through Vaughn's chest. He nodded curtly and retreated to the door. "I'll let you settle your things." Outside, he drew a deep breath of frigid air, trying to clear his head of unwelcome thoughts. Felicity Vaughan was temporary. A complication fate had thrust upon him, nothing more. Once the past cleared, she'd continue her journey, and his life would return to its proper isolation. The thought brought none of the comfort it should have. Days stretched into weeks, and January surrendered to February's grip. Felicity's presence at the Triple J Ranch transformed from novelty to fixture as the mountain passes remained stubbornly impassable. The arrangement settled into uncomfortable permanence. Vaughn slept in the bunkhouse with the men, leaving his cabin to Felicity. Despite his initial resistance, Vaughn found himself increasingly drawn into her orbit. Evenings that once passed in solitary silence now featured chess matches by firelight, her delighted laughter when she occasionally bested him warming the cabin more effectively than any fire. "I never imagined cowboys played chess," she remarked one evening, studying the board intently. Vaughn moved his knight. "Most don't. My father taught me." He believed in exercising the mind as well as the body. "Where is he now?" "Dead. 15 years. Apache raid on our Texas homestead." Her eyes lifted to his, compassion rather than pity in their depths. "You were young. 10. Old enough to bury what remained of my family." He hadn't spoken of that day in years, yet the words emerged unbidden. "Mother died the following winter. Grief, mostly. And you've been alone since then." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "Safer that way." Felicity's fingers hovered over her queen, then withdrew. "Is it safer, I mean, or just lonelier?" The question lingered between them, unanswered but not forgotten. Vaughn found himself watching her when she wasn't looking. The grace of her movements, the thoughtful furrow of her brow when she read, the surprising strength in hands that had never known calluses before arriving at the ranch. February's isolation forced proximity that eroded carefully maintained boundaries. When Vaughn taught her to split kindling, his hands covered hers on the axe handle, and neither moved away as quickly as propriety demanded. When she insisted on learning to cook frontier style, their shoulders brushed as they stood side by side at his small stove, and the contact lingered. The ranch hands noticed. Comments emerged, first as gentle teasing, then as acceptance of what they considered inevitable. "Never seen the boss smile so much," Milo observed to Ethan one morning, deliberately within Vaughn's hearing. "Amazing what the right woman does to a man's disposition." "Shut it, Peters," Vaughn snapped, but without real heat. The truth gnawed at him. Something fundamental was shifting beneath his feet. The solitude he'd cultivated as protection no longer felt like safety. It felt like emptiness. Felicity's eventual departure loomed as a threat rather than a return to normalcy. One evening in late February, a sudden Chinook wind brought unseasonable warmth, melting snow into glittering rivulets under a full moon. Vaughn found Felicity standing outside the cabin, face lifted to the night sky. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said without turning, somehow knowing he was there. "In Boston, the city lights dim the stars. I never knew they could be so bright." He moved to stand beside her, close enough to feel her warmth but not touching. "The mountains have their compensations for all their harshness." "Yes," she agreed softly. "I'm beginning to understand that." Moonlight silvered her profile, catching in her hair like frost. Vaughn's hands ached to touch it, to discover if it felt as silken as it appeared. He clasped them behind his back instead. "The Blackfoot call these warm winds snow-eaters," he said, forcing conversation to mask dangerous thoughts. "If it continues, the pass might clear earlier than expected." She turned to face him, unexpected sadness in her expression. "You must be anxious to reclaim your cabin and your privacy." "No," he admitted before he could stop himself. "That is, there's no rush." Vaughn, his name on her lips, still startled him. When had they abandoned formalities? What happens when the snow melts? The question laid bare everything they'd carefully avoided discussing. Her obligations in Silver Creek, his responsibilities at the ranch, the impossible gulf between a Boston-educated schoolteacher and a frontier cowboy. "You continue to Silver Creek," he answered, the words tasting like ash. As planned. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. You have a contract. A purpose. Purposes can change, she said quietly. People can change. The air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Vaughn took a deliberate step backward, breaking the spell. Good night, Felicity, he said firmly. The wind's picking up. He retreated to the bunkhouse, where dreams of blue eyes and moonlit hair denied him rest until dawn. March arrived with warming temperatures and a ranch buzzing with anticipation of spring roundup. Felicity had integrated herself into daily life, helping with cooking, mending, and even learning basic horsemanship from a delighted Milo. Might make a proper Westerner of you yet, the old cowhand declared after she successfully trotted a circuit around the corral. Vaughn, watching from the fence, fought conflicting emotions. Pride in her adaptability warred with growing dread. The warmer the weather grew, the closer loomed their inevitable parting. The pass would open soon, perhaps within weeks. That evening, a rider appeared on the horizon, the first visitor since before the winter storms. Vaughn tensed automatically, one hand moving to his holster as he squinted at the approaching figure. Who is it? Felicity asked, joining him on the porch. Can't tell yet. Stay inside. She ignored him, of course, remaining firmly at his side as the rider drew near. The man was trail-worn but well-dressed, his coat marking him as someone of means rather than a drifter. Hello, the house, the stranger called, pulling his lathered horse to a stop. This the Triple J? It is, Vaughn replied cautiously. State your business. Name's Howard Pullman, representing the town council of Silver Creek. The man's eyes landed on Felicity and widened in recognition. Miss Vaughn? By God, you're alive. Felicity stepped forward. Mr. Pullman? You know me. We received your letter last fall accepting the teaching position. When you didn't arrive by December, we feared the worst. He dismounted, removing his hat. The town's been without a teacher for nearly 2 years now. The children are running wild, and parents are threatening to leave for more civilized places. I was delayed by the blizzard, Felicity explained. Mr. Jennings rescued me when my wagon overturned. Pullman's expression brightened. Then Silver Creek owes you a debt of gratitude, sir. We'd nearly given up hope of finding a suitable teacher. He turned back to Felicity. The pass cleared last week. I've come to escort you to town, if you're still willing. We can leave first thing tomorrow. Vaughn felt the ground shift beneath him. Tomorrow. So soon. He'd imagined more time. For what, he couldn't say. That's very sudden, Felicity said, her voice unnaturally even. I'll need tonight to prepare. Of course. I'll bunk with your ranch hands, if that's agreeable. Pullman directed this to Vaughn, who nodded stiffly. Milo will show you to the bunkhouse, he managed. After arrangements were made, an uncomfortable silence fell between Vaughn and Felicity as they stood alone on the porch. The setting sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard, painting everything in golden light that belied the coldness spreading through Vaughn's chest. I should pack, she finally said. Yes. She hesitated, searching his face for something he couldn't offer. Vaughn, I'll help bring your trunk, he interrupted, unable to bear whatever goodbye she might construct. You should rest. It's a long ride to Silver Creek. That night, Vaughn sat alone by the bunkhouse fire long after the others slept, turning a chess piece, the White Queen, in his fingers. She'd left it on his cabin table with a note, for our unfinished game. Dawn arrived with a clarity that seemed to mock his sleepless night. Felicity emerged from the cabin wearing her Boston traveling dress, now mended and cleaned. The sight of her in city clothes rather than the practical ranch garments she'd adopted struck Vaughn with unexpected force. She was returning to her world, a world where he had no place. The men gathered to see her off, each awkwardly offering good wishes and small parting gifts. Milo presented her with a hand-carved wooden horse. So you remember your riding lessons, he explained gruffly. I could never forget, she assured him, embracing the old cowhand without reservation. Finally, only Vaughn remained unaddressed. He stood slightly apart, hat in hands, as her trunk was secured to Pullman's packhorse. Time to go, Miss Vaughn, Pullman announced cheerfully. We can reach Wilson Station by nightfall if we make good time. Felicity nodded, then walked directly to Vaughn. The others discreetly moved away, giving them a moment of privacy. I don't know how to thank you properly, she said quietly. You saved my life. Vaughn stared at the hat in his hands. Anyone would have done the same. No, they wouldn't. She placed her hand on his arm, forcing him to meet her gaze. I'll never forget you, Vaughn Jennings. The words cut deeper than any knife. Remembrance was cold comfort against the reality of her departure. He wanted to speak, to express something of the turmoil within him, but years of emotional discipline locked the words away. Instead, he simply nodded and stepped back, allowing her hand to fall from his arm. Safe journey, Miss Vaughan. The formality was deliberate, a return to boundaries too long ignored. She flinched slightly, but recovered with practiced grace. Goodbye, she whispered, then turned and allowed Pullman to help her mount the horse he'd brought for her. Vaughn watched them ride away, refusing to move until they disappeared over the eastern ridge. Only then did he turn to find Milo watching him with undisguised disappointment. You're a damned fool, the older man stated flatly. Mind your own business, Peters. She loves you, you know. Vaughn's head snapped up. She's known me barely 2 months. Some things don't need time. Milo spat disgustedly. Been riding with you 8 years now, and I've never seen you look at anything the way you look at her. But you're too scared to admit it. She belongs in Silver Creek. Teaching. It's why she came west. She belongs wherever she chooses to belong, Milo countered. And she chose you. But you were too busy protecting yourself from imagined hurts to see it. The old cowhand stalked away, leaving Vaughn alone with truths he'd refused to acknowledge. The protective walls he'd built after his family's deaths had become a prison, keeping out life itself in the name of safety. Felicity had shown him a different way, had offered connection, understanding, perhaps even love, and he had rejected it out of fear. Fear of loss, fear of vulnerability, fear of needing someone who might be taken away, just as everything he'd ever loved had been taken. The realization struck with physical force, driving the breath from his lungs. What had he done? Silver Creek hummed with excitement as word spread of the schoolteacher's arrival. Children peered curiously from windows and doorways as Felicity rode down the town's muddy main street beside Howard Pullman. After weeks in the relative quiet of the ranch, the bustle of even this small mining settlement felt overwhelming. Not much to look at, Pullman acknowledged, noting her expression. But it's growing. 20 new families since last summer, and more coming with the spring thaw. The town consisted of a single street lined with false-fronted buildings in various states of construction and repair. A saloon, general store, assay office, and rough-hewn church formed the core of the settlement. At the far end stood a small white building that could only be the schoolhouse. We fixed it up special when we got your letter, Pullman said proudly as they approached. New roof, glass windows, no more oiled paper like the last teacher had. Your living quarters are in back. Felicity nodded, attempting to summon enthusiasm. It looks adequate. The living space proved to be a single room containing a narrow bed, small table with 2 chairs, cast-iron stove, and bookshelf. Clean but Spartan, with none of the warmth she'd grown accustomed to in Vaughn's cabin. Town ladies will be by tomorrow to welcome you properly, Pullman explained, depositing her trunk. School can start Monday. Give you time to settle in. Left alone, Felicity sat on the edge of the hard bed and finally allowed the tears she'd suppressed throughout the journey. She had achieved her goal, secured her position, her independence, her future. Yet instead of triumph, she felt only a hollow ache where happiness should be. In the 6 days since leaving the Triple J, she'd replayed her final conversation with Vaughn countless times. His distant formality, the careful way he'd stepped back from her touch, all evidence that whatever connection she'd imagined between them had been one-sided fantasy. Foolish girl, she whispered to herself, echoing her mother's favorite admonishment. Dreams don't feed you. Yet she couldn't banish the memories. Chess by firelight, his patient instructions as she learned to ride, the rare smile that transformed his serious face into something achingly handsome. In those unguarded moments, she'd glimpsed the man beneath the protective armor, intelligent, honorable, capable of tenderness he refused to acknowledge. She'd fallen in love with that man. The realization had come gradually, then settled with unshakable certainty. But he didn't want her love, or perhaps any love at all. The following days passed in a blur of introductions and preparations. Silver Creek's residents welcomed her warmly, eager for their children to receive proper education. Felicity threw herself into organizing the schoolhouse, arranging books, and planning lessons with determined focus. Work would be her salvation, as it had been after her parents' deaths. On Sunday evening, as she reviewed her plans for the school's opening day, a knock interrupted her concentration. She opened the door to find a nervous-looking girl of about 12 clutching a small bunch of wildflowers. "Evening, Miss Vaughn," the girl said, offering the flowers. "Ma said I should bring these. Welcome gift." "Thank you." Felicity smiled, accepting them gratefully. "And you are?" "Sarah Miller. I'll be in your school tomorrow." The girl hesitated. "Is it true you got caught in the blizzard and nearly died?" News traveled quickly in small towns. "I'm afraid it is. And a handsome cowboy rescued you." Sarah's eyes gleamed with romantic interest. "Like in a dime novel?" Felicity's smile faltered. "Something like that." "Why didn't he come with you to Silver Creek?" the girl asked with childish directness. "If a man rescued me from certain death, I'd make him marry me for sure." "Sarah Miller." A woman's voice called from the street. "Stop bothering the teacher with personal questions." The girl scampered away with a hasty goodbye, leaving Felicity staring at the wildflowers in her hand. Out of the mouths of children came the question she'd asked herself every night. Why had Vaughn let her leave? Because he wanted to, her practical mind answered. Because whatever she'd imagined between them hadn't been real. She placed the flowers in a jar of water and returned to her lesson plans, forcing thoughts of dark eyes and gentle hands from her mind. Morning brought 28 eager, or at least curious, students to the schoolhouse, ranging from 6-year-olds to teenagers nearly grown. Felicity welcomed them with outward confidence that belied her inner nervousness. Teaching was her vocation, her purpose. This moment represented everything she'd worked toward. She had just begun her opening address when the schoolhouse door opened, admitting a latecomer. Felicity turned, prepared to establish her authority with the tardy student, and froze. Vaughn Jennings stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his tall frame filling the entrance. For a moment, Felicity wondered if her mind had conjured him from desperate imagination. But the student's curious murmurs confirmed his solid reality. "Pardon the interruption, Miss Vaughn," he said formally, though his eyes held nothing of the coldness from their parting. "May I speak with you? It's urgent." 28 heads swiveled between them with undisguised interest. Felicity's heart hammered against her ribs with such force she wondered if the children could hear it. "Class," she managed, her voice remarkably steady. "Please open your primers to page 1 and begin reading silently while I address this situation." She moved to the door where Vaughn stood, painfully aware of the attention focused on them. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "Making the biggest mistake of my life, right?" he answered quietly. "Or trying to. I don't understand." "Neither did I. Until you left." His eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "Can we speak privately?" Felicity glanced back at her students, who had abandoned all pretense of reading to watch the unfolding drama. Her first day as teacher, her career, her independence, everything she'd worked toward, hung in the balance. 5 minutes, she conceded, stepping onto the schoolhouse porch and pulling the door mostly closed behind them. In the clear morning light, she could see changes in him. New lines around his eyes suggested sleepless nights. His normally clean-shaven face carried several days' stubble. He looked like a man who'd ridden hard with little rest. "You've come a long way for 5 minutes," she observed, fighting to maintain composure. "I'd have come further," he replied simply. "I was wrong, Felicity." The admission startled her. "About what?" "Everything." He took a deep breath. "When I found you in that blizzard, I thought I was just doing what any decent man would. Taking you to the ranch, helping you recover. It was simple human kindness." He stepped closer, still clutching his hat like a lifeline. "But it became something else. Something I wasn't prepared for. All those years since losing my family, I'd convinced myself that attachments were weaknesses I couldn't afford. That caring for someone meant eventually losing them. So better not to care at all." Felicity's breath caught. "Vaughn, please, let me finish." His voice roughened. "Watching you ride away with Pullman, I told myself it was for the best. That you belonged in Silver Creek, teaching, building a life without some scarred cowboy who wouldn't know what to do with happiness if it bit him." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Then Milo called me a damned fool, and I realized he was right. I've been hiding from life, not living it. You showed me there could be more. Chess games and conversations, and someone who sees past the walls I built. He finally released the battered hat, reaching for her hand instead. I love you, Felicity Vaughan. I should have said it before you left. I should have asked you to stay, or offered to come with you, or found some compromise that kept us together. Instead, I let fear make my decision. The words she'd longed to hear rendered her momentarily speechless. Hope warred with practicality in her chest. What about the ranch? She finally asked. Your responsibilities? The owner returns next month. I've given notice. He squeezed her hand gently. I don't know exactly what comes next. I'm not asking you to abandon your teaching. But Silver Creek needs capable men as much as teachers. I could find work here, build something, if you wanted that. And if I don't, she challenged, needing certainty, then I'll leave today and trouble you no more. The vulnerability in his expression nearly undid her. I just needed you to know the truth. From inside the schoolhouse came the unmistakable sounds of children abandoning all pretense of studying. Whispers rising to excited chatter, chairs scraping as they jostled for better viewing positions near the windows. Felicity laughed softly, aware of their audience. My students are getting quite an education on their first day. Not the lesson you planned. No, but perhaps one they need to learn. She stepped closer, her decision made. That sometimes love requires courage. That happiness might arrive in unexpected ways. That even the most carefully constructed plans can change when the heart speaks clearly. Hope dawned in his eyes. And what is your heart saying, Felicity? That I love you too, she answered simply. That I have since somewhere between chess games and writing lessons. That leaving the ranch was the hardest thing I've ever done, not because I feared Silver Creek, but because I was leaving you. His hands framed her face with gentle reverence. I won't ask you to choose between teaching and us. There must be a way to have both. There is, she agreed. It starts with you kissing me properly, Vaughn Jennings, so these children can have something truly scandalous to report to their parents tonight. His smile transformed his face before he lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with all the emotion they denied for too long. When they finally separated, breathless and laughing, a chorus of cheers and whistles erupted from the schoolhouse. Well, Felicity said, straightening her collar with feigned primness, I believe my authority as teacher may be irreparably compromised. Worth it? Vaughn asked, eyes dancing with newfound lightness. Entirely. She took his hand firmly in hers. Now come meet your audience properly. They'll be telling this story for years. By summer's end, Silver Creek buzzed with preparations for the town's first proper wedding. What had begun as scandalous gossip, the new schoolteacher and the handsome cowboy embracing on the schoolhouse porch, had transformed into the community's favorite romance. Vaughn had proven his worth quickly, helping organize protection for the miners against increasing road agent activity, then accepting the vacant position of town marshal when the previous occupant departed for California gold fields. The arrangement allowed him to remain close to the schoolhouse while establishing his own place in Silver Creek. Their courtship proceeded under the town's watchful eyes, providing entertainment and hope in equal measure. Sunday walks, shared meals at the hotel restaurant, and Vaughn's regular appearances at school functions became expected sights. When he finally proposed formally, on bended knee before the entire town during the Independence Day celebration, the cheer that arose nearly drowned out Felicity's tearful acceptance. On their wedding day in September 1883, the small church overflowed with well-wishers. Children from Felicity's school scattered wildflowers along the aisle, and Milo Peters, who'd left the Triple J to work at Silver Creek's livery stable, stood proudly as Vaughn's best man. Never seen a prettier bride, the old cowhand declared as Felicity appeared in the doorway wearing a simple white dress adorned with lace sent by sympathetic townswomen from Denver. Vaughn, standing before the preacher in a new black suit, felt his breath catch at the sight of her. Blonde hair arranged in an elegant crown of braids, blue eyes shining with happiness, she embodied everything he'd once believed he couldn't have, everything he'd now die protecting. As they spoke their vows before God and the community, Vaughn reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A chance encounter in a blizzard, a woman too stubborn to die, a man too afraid to live, and the slow, inexorable awakening that had transformed them both. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the preacher announced. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Their kiss sealed promises spoken and unspoken, of partnership, of family, of a future built together despite the frontier's harshness. When they turned to face their cheering friends, Vaughn kept Felicity's hand firmly in his, a physical reminder of the connection he'd once feared and now cherished above all else. The celebration lasted well into the night, with dancing, feasting, and toasts to the couple who had captured the town's collective heart. As darkness fell, they slipped away to the small cabin Vaughn had built on the edge of town, close enough for Felicity to reach the school easily, yet with a view of mountains that reminded them both of their beginning. "Happy?" he asked as they stood on the porch, silver moonlight bathing the landscape before them. "Completely." She leaned against him, her head fitting perfectly beneath his chin. "Though I do wonder sometimes." "About what?" "If that blizzard never happened. If my wagon hadn't overturned. If another traveler had found me instead of you." She turned in his arms to face him. "Was it fate or chance that brought us together?" Vaughn considered the question seriously. "I don't know about fate, but I do know this. When Thunder heard you in that wagon, something made me listen to him instead of continuing home. Call it instinct or providence or plain dumb luck." His fingers traced the curve of her cheek with wonder that hadn't diminished despite months of courtship. "What matters isn't how our story began, but that we recognized it as a story worth continuing, worth fighting for." He smiled, the expression now coming easily to a face once set in permanent gravity. "Worth building a life around." "Our story," she echoed, leaning into his touch. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." Vaughn drew her closer, his kiss a promise of all the chapters yet to be written. "And I intend to make it a very, very long one." Inside their new home, a chessboard awaited on a table by the fire, the White Queen positioned precisely where Felicity had left it months before, ready to continue their unfinished game. But the real game, of life built together on the frontier, had only just begun, and neither had any intention of playing it alone again.